नंदा सर भी आ गए हैं। आई थिंक नंदा सर प्लीज अनम्यूट। वेलकम सर।
Yes, sir, we are live.
अमरीश,
Yes, sir.
कोई डेवलपमेंट है नंदा जी की?
नो सर, मेरी तरफ से यहाँ पे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। आप पार्टिसिपेंट्स भी हमारे आ गए हैं।
गोल सर प्लीज स्टार्ट कीजिए।
ये नंदा जी आ गए हैं या उसको फिर डायरेक्ट सेमिनार स्टार्ट करना है?
नहीं, नंदा जी आ चुके हैं, बट आई थिंक वो हमें नहीं सुन पा रहे हैं और उनका म्यूट है, मतलब उन्हें अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा।
डॉक्टर साहब पहले आप लोग या किस तरह से करना है?
नहीं, आप वो अपना करके मुझे दे देना, मैं फिर करूंगा।
ठीक है। डियर पार्टिसिपेंट्स, शिवाजी मार्ग सीपी स्टडी सर्कल में सबका स्वागत है। आज का जो सेमिनार है हमारा इनकम टैक्स 271 पेनल्टीज के ऊपर। हमने डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी को रिक्वेस्ट की थी कि आज का जो सेमिनार है वो अपने करें। डॉक्टर साहब के साथ में सौम्य अग्रवाल जी भी हैं हमारे साथ में। डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी एक्स ITAT मेंबर, बहुत ज्यादा एक्सपर्टाइज लीगल मैटर्स में, इनकम टैक्स में। हमारा ये सौभाग्य है कि हम डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी के साथ में आज अवेलेबल है। हमारे जितने भी शिवाजी मार्ग स्टडी सर्कल हुए, जब भी हमने डॉक्टर साहब से रिक्वेस्ट किया तो हमारे बीच में वो उपस्थित हुए और हम इनका तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करते हैं। जब भी आधी रात को भी हमने फोन किया डॉक्टर साहब को तो उन्होंने उस फोन का ऑनर किया, कभी ये नहीं कहा कि मैं कोई सा बिजी हूँ या कुछ और हूँ। तो चाहे वो पर्सनल काम हो महाराज या किसी भी तरह से, और मैंने सोचा कि सिर्फ हमारे को ही उन्होंने एश्योरेंस दी। एक सीए फैटर्निटी से जितना भी उनको प्यार है हम समझ सकते हैं, और एक चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स के बीच में जितना भी कोऑर्डिनेशन है आपस में और जितना भी एक अच्छा वातावरण है, तो मेरे को नहीं लगता कि किसी भी प्रोफेशन में इस तरह से मिलेगा। दिल्ली में हम बैठे हैं, कोई हमारे बीच में आपस में कोई कंपटीशन नहीं है, एक दूसरे की हेल्प करते हैं। जहाँ पे भी जरूरत है हम एक अप्रोच कर सकते हैं। बड़ी बड़ी हस्ती को, अमरजीत चोपड़ा साहब हो, चाहे नंदा जी हो, चाहे डॉक्टर राकेश जी हो, चाहे मदान साहब हो, किसी भी तरह के, चाहे गुप्ता जी हो, चाहे वीर गुप्ता जी हो, चाहे अनिल गुप्ता जी हो, तो ये हमारा सबका सौभाग्य है कि हम एक बहुत अच्छी फेडरेटिव से बिलोंग करते हैं। और आज के जो टॉपिक है हमारे डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी का, और उसके साथ में जो सोमिल जी रहेंगे। और अभी नंदा जी हमारे की नोट्स में, नंदा जी हमारे जो आप सबको बता दें जो शिवाजी मार्ग स्टडी सर्कल है, तो वो नंदा जी के ही स्टार्ट किया हुआ है और उनकी इंस्पायरेशन से ही मानो ये स्टडी सर्कल स्टार्ट हुआ है। बहुत टाइम से नंदा जी मतलब जो इंस्टीट्यूट की जो NIRC में या सेंट्रल काउंसिल में अपना योगदान देते आ रहे हैं। NIRC के चेयरमैन भी रहे हैं और बहुत सारी अच्छी कमेटियों में उनका योगदान आज भी है और पहले भी था। तो आज का जो की नोट एड्रेस है वो कुछ नंदा जी के साथ में हम, और मैं नंदा जी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा अभी कि की नोट एड्रेस आज का वो स्टार्ट करेंगे। उसके बाद डॉक्टर राकेश जी। नंदा जी, नंदा जी सुन रहे हैं हमारे को? हेलो नंदा जी, ज्वाइन किया हुआ? हेलो हेलो नंदा जी, मेरे को लग रहा है कि अभी नंदा जी का लिंक अभी नहीं आ रहा या वो ज्वाइन नहीं कर पा रहे अभी हमारे को। तो मैं शकुन अभी डॉक्टर राकेश जी की
हेलो
हेलो,
am I audible?
Yes sir, you are audible.
Oh God, oh God, I'm not able to understand. There is a technical glitch. मैं unmute नहीं कर पा रहा था तो मैं फिर मोबाइल से आया हूँ। Thank you so much. I'm so enlightened that I have with me my very dear friend Radhesham Goyal, with whom I used to study in the council days. Mr. Shagun Gupta, the co-convener, my elder brother, and my birthday sharer, CA Rakesh Gupta sir, ex-ITT member, Somil Agarwal, हमारे भतीजे, and all who have come here to go home more enlightened. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a proud privilege to be a part of Shivaji Marg CP Study Circle. The work done by them is really commendable. And the topics suggested today, there are two topics. One is penalty under section 271 AAD. Largely, it is a penalty for false entry, etc. in the books of account. And the basic purpose of it is to curb malpractices of issuing fake notices. You are all aware that after introduction of GST, several cases were found by the GST authority where suppliers were fraudulently claiming ITC on the basis of fake invoices to reduce their overall GST liabilities. Moreover, these invoices were issued by racketers who did not have any business or profession, and invoices were issued without actual supply of goods and services. So in order to curb this, penalty under section 271 AAD was pronounced. And the quantum of penalty, it will be discussed, the legal pronoun shall be discussed by both the learned speakers, but the quantum of penalty under section 271 AAD is a sum equal to aggregate of amount of false entries or omitted entries. Ladies and gentlemen, we as chartered accountant needs to understand one thing very candidly. We were set up an act of parliament way back on 1st July 1949, when the most important document to the democracy, the constitution, was not adopted. All of you are well aware that the constitution to this august country was adopted on 26 January 1950. The pertinent question arises is, what prompted the government of India to set up an Institute of Chartered Accountants of India when its own democratic setup was not in place? The answer is very candid, very simple, very forthcoming. They were looking for it to ensure that things fall in the right esteem. हालात आज भी जुदा नहीं है. आज भी economy crossroads पे है. And it is the onerous duty of people like us who are qualified chartered accountants to ensure that the derailed economy comes back to the rail. The second topic of the day is penalty under section 270A, which is essentially a penalty for underreporting and misreporting of income. Under underreporting of income, a penalty of 50% of amount of tax payable on underreported income shall be levied. Underreporting is a consequence of any misreporting thereof. Then penalty at the rate of 200% of amount of tax payable on underreporting income shall be levied. I would like to put here one thing. I am a fan of Mr. Rakesh Gupta. I have seen him grow from normal heights. Let me tell you, Rakesh Gupta ji, through his sheer perseverance, hard work, and indulgence, came up to these unprecedented levels. When I think of Rakesh ji, I am reminded of N.A. Palkiwala. Palkiwala Saab also changed his entire turpitude of life by his sheer hard work. And this is a message to all chartered accountants. And age is no more. Don't think that you are grown too senior or you are too young. A person who wants to work hard, a person who wants to hone his technical skills can do wonders. I want to tell you very decisively that we are a class apart. Doing chartered accountancy in itself gives the certificate, gives the guarantee that we are a class apart. Maybe come and get involved into certain areas where our thought process gets implicated, where our thought process gets distorted. But we have to come out of that. If we don't come out of that, we shall not be in the right place. And if I have to say something for Rakesh ji, तो अगर उर्दू में शेर कहा जाए तो शेर कुछ इस तरह होगा कि तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है. तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है. काबिल लोगों के तो दुश्मन भी कायल होते हैं. मैं ये तो जानता नहीं कि राकेश जी के दुश्मन हैं, लेकिन सब उनके कायल हैं कि वर्किंग को उनके तरीके से हर काम को खत्म करने के लिए. और चलते चलते मैं सारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स के लिए एक छोटा सा संदेश चाहूंगा कि थोड़ा सा और निखर जाऊं, थोड़ा सा और निखर जाऊं, यही मैंने ठानी है. जिंदगी थोड़ा रुक, अभी हार कहाँ मानी है. हम सब ने प्रोफेशनली ग्रो करना है. ये टाइम, कोविड टाइम्स ने हमें बड़ी बुरी तरह फंसा दिया. पूरी इकोनॉमी फंस गई। लेकिन यहाँ से हमने खुद आगे बढ़ते हुए अपने स्टेक होल्डर्स की हैंड होल्डिंग करनी, दैट इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। वी हैव टू इंश्योर दैट आवर स्टेक होल्डर्स, all people who are associated with us like our clients, need to be brought out of this mess. जब वो mess में बाहर आएंगे तब हमारी प्रोफेशनल कैपेबिलिटीज सही मायने में प्रलिफ्ट होंगी। The topic, as discussed by Rakesh ji and Somil, needs to be largely and candidly viewed and taken into account. The best part of this is कि राकेश जी को इतना एक्सपीरियंस है from the level of a practicing chartered accountant to the highest level of judiciary as a member of ITAT, that he knows the entire, he is on the both sides of the table, and therefore his rich experience shall pave the way path for us to understand how we need to prepare a case and present it. So ladies and gentlemen, not taking much of your time, I take this opportunity to present to you the great visionary, the great professional, and a very experienced, seasoned expert on income tax, C. Rakesh Gupta ji. Over to Gupta ji for his words of wisdom. I am sorry, I would have to withdraw because मैं सड़क पर से बोल रहा हूँ, मेरे ऑफिस में कुछ टेक्निकल इशू हो गया, समझ नहीं आया क्यों नहीं चल रहा। So I will withdraw. जब तक मैं सुन सकूँ तब तक सुनूंगा, then I will withdraw. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Nanda ji. Thanks a lot.
Sir, please unmute.
Yes. Thanks, Nanda Sahab, for your highly charitable expressions for me, to many of which I may not actually deserve. But then it is coming from a person of your stature and standing, then I accept with the utmost humility these expressions. I and Nanda Sahab share a lot of things in common. One thing he has told about the date of birth, he was also born on 3rd January, so am I. The other thing, on the lighter note, we share even our volume, not in terms of voice, but then in terms of the area. So, Goel Sahab, Shakun ji, my fellow co-speaker Somil. Somil has to speak on 270 capital A, whereas I would speak on section 271 AAD. Somil is also a chartered accountant, company secretary, cost and works accountant. He is DISA qualified, LLB, and he is LLM from United Kingdom, and has come up very nicely both in terms of litigations and in terms of delivering lectures. He has authored one article, well-researched article on section 270 capital A, and which has been published in the Taxman, in which he has brought out several important facets of this penalty. Penalties, as all of us know, are sanctions. As you may have heard that the USA imposed sanctions on Iran. Now the sanctions are imposed in order to coerce the compliance. Similarly, the penalties under the Income Tax Act are also sanctions, and because of which the compliance is exacted, and in case of non-compliance, the Damocles sword of the penalty in the form of this sanction keeps looming large on the head of the taxpayer. So I will request Somil to speak about this sanction in the form of section 270 capital A, which is in the form of penalty on underreported income. So Somil will take about half an hour, and then I will pick up the thread from that stage. Somil.
Thank you, sir. My guru, Dr. Rakesh Gupta sir, respected Nanda sir, Goel sir, Shakun ji, Amrish ji, and my very dear friends. So as discussed by sir, I would be discussing section 270 capital A, penalty for underreporting of income and misreporting of income. 270 capital A is a provision which has replaced the erstwhile provision of 271. and the earlier provision of penalty 270(11)(c) had two charges: penalty for concealment of particulars of income and penalty for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. This provision of 270(A) is applicable from assessment year 17-18. Now you may kindly recall, because in 270(11)(c) we had two charges. There was a lot of litigation because of these two charges, whether satisfaction has been recorded properly, whether the charge is clear from the satisfaction recorded or not, whether penalty has been levied for the correct charge. Satisfaction has been recorded for one charge, whereas penalty has been levied for the other charge. So because of these two charges, the revenue has been bleeding a lot in terms of the loss of the revenue, and even in cases which otherwise had enough justification for levy of penalty on merits on such super technical and hyper technical grounds. So to do away with this, the legislature has now coined the concept of underreported income, and accordingly section 270(A), which has been put on the statute with effect from assessment year 17-18, provides that the assessing officer or commissioner appeal or principal commissioner or commissioner may direct during the course of any proceeding any person who has underreported income to be liable to pay penalty in addition to any tax, if any, on the underreported income. So the whole provision of 270(A) revolves around the new term, the most important term that is coined as underreported income. Now, what is underreported income? Sir, underreported income is the difference between the income assessed by the assessing officer and the income processed under 143. To put it very, although underreported income has been explained under subsection 2 and 3 of 270(A) with the help of various situations of return filed, income shown in return, processing of return under 143(1)(a), assessment or reassessment frame. But to put it very simply, the underreported income is in fact the total addition of disallowances made by the assessing officer, which have caused the variance between the processed income and the assessed income. So the additions and disallowances made by the assessing officer in the assessment order, which have caused the variation, and the total variation between the processed and the assessed income represented by the various additions or disallowances is your underreported income. Now, another concept that has been introduced, underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income. In certain circumstances, the assessing officer can treat a particular addition or disallowance as a case of underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, which will attract the higher rate of penalty. And the circumstances we'll discuss a little later. So, sir, underreported income has been explained by way of various additions or disallowances. Now, first and foremost, under section 270(A), who can levy penalty and on what? Sir, 270(A) subsection 1 provides three authorities: assessing officer, commissioner appeals, or principal commissioner or commissioner. These are the same authorities which were given in the erstwhile provision of 270(11)(c). Now, assessing officer, with respect to the additions or disallowances made during the course of any assessment or reassessment, which constitute the underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, the jurisdiction of the assessing officer would be to levy penalty on such underreported income. As far as the learned CIT appeal is concerned, the learned CIT appeal ceased with the appeal against quantum proceeding. If he makes any announcement under section 251 in respect of the quantum appeal, that is the appeal against the assessment before him, then qua that announcement that the learned CIT appeal makes, his jurisdiction to levy penalty under section 270(A) is qua that underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income found in regard to such announcement made by the learned CIT appeal. A question may arise that while seized with the penalty appeal, if the CIT appeal makes announcement of penalty, then sir, kindly note that power of enhancing penalty in respect of the penalty appeal adjudicated by the learned CIT appeal, that power is power exercised under section 251 of enhancement. So the jurisdiction under 270 capital A to the learned CIT appeal to levy penalty for underreported income is qua the enhancement of income done by learned CIT appeal. The third authority, that is the commissioner or principal commissioner, in while exercising their powers under section 263, and if they revise the income assessed by the assessing officer, then qua that revised income, the jurisdiction to levy penalty under 270 capital A lies with learned commissioner. So these are the three authorities, the kind of jurisdiction that they have for levying of penalty under section 270 capital A. I'll just share my screen also with the provision in front. Now, these are the authorities that can levy penalty, and the penalty can be levied for underreported income or underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income. Now, first and foremost, the issue of I want to deliberate on is how an assessee can reduce the underreported income, or I would say the defense mechanism against the underreported income alleged by the assessing officer, or how you can mitigate the risk of levy of penalty. So subsection 6 of 270 capital A provides the defense mechanism of reducing the underreported income to the maximum extent possible. Now, sir, as I explained, say 4 additions are made by the assessing officer in the assessment. In totality, they constitute the underreported income. Now, if the assessee is able to prove based on the material on record and the pleadings made that the additions fall within the 5 clauses that are given under subsection 6, then such addition or disallowance would not be included in the underreported income, and accordingly it would be reduced from the underreported income. Say out of these 4 addition and disallowances, on 2 additions and disallowances, assessee is able to prove that the addition or disallowances are covered under any of these clauses. Then such addition or disallowance would be reduced from the underreported income. Now, what are these clauses? These 5 clauses under subsection 6. Subclause A. Subclause A provides that if the assessee is able to show that assessee has offered an explanation to the assessing officer, the explanation is bona fide to satisfaction of the assessing officer, and assessee has disclosed all material facts to substantiate the explanation, then any addition or disallowance for which assessee is able to fulfill all these 3 parameters, then assessee can plead that such addition or disallowance is covered by clause A and accordingly should be reduced from the underreported income. Say for example, sir, assessing officer makes a disallowance under section 48(2) and says that the, say for example, of rupees 10 lakh rupees on the ground that the expenditure has been incurred in excess of the fair market value of the expense. Now, if the assessee has given an explanation that no sir, the expenditure is in line with the market rate available, further assessee, the explanation of the assessee is bona fide, and assessee has substantiated by way of quotations, parallel quotations from the market, from various other vendors to show that the transaction is at market price, then the assessee can very well argue that, sir, I have offered an explanation, the explanation is bona fide, and I have substantiated and disclosed all material facts. Then it is covered under clause A, and accordingly such disallowance, even if made, has to be reduced from the underreported income. Now, clause B. In this case, in clause B, it has been provided that any addition made on estimate basis, even though the accounts are correct and complete to the satisfaction of the assessing officer, however, the method employed is such that the income cannot be deduced properly. So in case, say for example, in real estate cases, assessee has applied CCM method, whereas assessing officer says, no, PCM has to be applied. And accordingly, addition is made and on estimation basis by applying PCM. So if the accounts of the SSC and correct are complete, and it is only because of this method which was employed by the SSC, because of which income could not be deduced properly, that has been changed by the assessing officer, then SSC, even if the addition is made on estimate basis, SSC can plead, sir, my case is covered under clause B, and accordingly, the addition so made should be reduced from the underreported income. Now, next clause, sir. Any disallowance made on estimate basis, in respect of which assessee himself has estimated a lower amount of disallowance and it has been included in the computation of income, and assessee has disclosed all material facts in respect of the disallowance, then the case can be covered under clause C to plead that such disallowance should be reduced from the underreported income. A perfect example that comes to my mind is, say, in respect of the suo motu disallowance on account of personal expenses. Say, assessee himself disallows 5% of the expenditure on, say, vehicle expenses in the computation. Whereas during the course of proceeding of the assessment, assessing officer says, no, 5% is less. I will disallow 15%. So this enhancement of disallowance made by the assessing officer, even if made, the assessee can very well plead, sir, look, I have estimated a disallowance on a, even though on a lower amount. This is included in the computation of income, and I have disclosed all material facts regarding the disallowance. Then my case is very well covered under clause C, and accordingly it should be reduced from the underreported income. Clause D. Amount of underreported income represented by any addition made with respect to the arms and price determined by the transfer pricing officer. Now, sir, the transfer pricing officer can make additions, adjustments on account of, say, acceptance or rejections of filters. Some filters applied by the SSC may have been rejected by the transfer pricing officer, or he may apply some fresh filters, or some comparables taken by the SSC have been rejected, or AO himself finds some new comparable. So on these accounts, adjustments can be made. However, if the SSC is able to fulfill 3 parameters, that is that assessee has declared the international transaction under section 92E as per the form which is to be filed under form 3CEB. Second, the documentation and information required to be maintained on account of the transfer pricing transaction by the SSC as prescribed under section 92D, read with rule 10D. Those have been maintained by the SSC. And number 3, the SSC has disclosed all material facts relating to the transaction. So if these 3 parameters are fulfilled by the SSC, then the SSC can plead that, sir, my case, even if the adjustment is made, is very well covered under clause D of subsection 6, and accordingly this adjustment should be, or addition should be reduced from the underreported income. So the last clause, that is more of an exception given, is the amount of undisclosed income referred to in section 271 AAB. Now, sir, you may kindly recall 271 AAB is a penalty which has been provided in respect of the specified years which are in respect of the search cases, and the provision 271 AAB defines undisclosed income. So any addition which is covered under the concept of undisclosed income as defined in 271 AAB in respect of the specified years which are covered under 271 AAB, on such additions or disallowances, penalty, since specific provision under 271 AAB has been provided, penalty will be levied only under section 271 AAB, and no penalty under section 270 capital A can be levied. However, kindly note, sir, these specified years are generally search year and the year prior to it, that is the year for which date of filing of return has not expired on the date of search. So, in respect of these specified years, you may kindly recall, the whole assessment is open to the assessing officer. And there can be additions, say, on account of 40A3, on account of 41.1, on account of 40AIA, which can be made and which are not covered under the definition of undisclosed income under section 271 AAB. So, such additions and disallowances which are not covered under undisclosed income as referred in section 271AA(b), then in respect of such addition or disallowances which can constitute underreported income, penalty would be levied under section 270(A). Now, you may kindly recall 270(11)(c), the penalty, minimum penalty was 100% and maximum penalty was 300%. Whereas in the new regime of 270(A), if it is a case of simpliciter underreported income, that is, it is not a case of misreporting of income, then penalty would be 50% of the amount of tax payable on the underreported income. Say, for example, the example that I gave, 4 additions and disallowances were made. 2 assessee is able to successfully plead that are covered under subsection 6 in any of the 5 clauses. Then, remaining 2, unless the assessing officer makes out a case that it is a case of misreporting of income, if it is simpliciter underreported income, say these 2 disallowances constitute a total addition of underreported income of 10 lakh rupees, then the tax, for example, say is 3 lakh rupees, and the penalty would be 1.5 lakh rupees, 50% of the amount of tax payable on the underreported income. However, if the assessing officer makes out a case that underreported income is in consequence of misreporting of income, then the levy of penalty would be at the rate of 200% of the amount of tax payable on the underreported income. So in case these 2 additions of 10 lakh rupees, in case the assessing officer makes out a case that it is a case of misreporting of income, then the penalty would be 6 lakh rupees. Tax payable 3 lakh rupees, 200%, 6 lakh rupees. Now, what are the situations in which the assessing officer can say that it is a case of underreported income in consequence of misreporting? Sir, that has been enumerated under subsection 9 of 270(A). These are 6 exhaustive clauses, and kindly note the burden to prove that the case of the assessee any particular addition or disallowance is covered under the provision of subsection 9 lies on the assessing officer, and this is somewhat identical akin to the concept of explanation 1A to the erstwhile provision of 270(11)(c), wherein the burden was on the assessing officer to show that the facts submitted by the assessee are false. So you may kindly recall we just discussed clause A of subsection 6 as a defense mechanism, that the explanation is offered, substantiated, and disclosure of all material facts. In that case, the burden is on the assessee. It is again similar, identical to the explanation 1B, which we used to have in section 270(11)(c). In that situation, in that subsection 6, the burden is on the assessee to lead the material on record with the help of the material on record and with the pleadings on record to show that the case is covered and addition or disallowance should be reduced from underreported income. However, in subsection 9, the burden to make out the case under subsection 9 to levy penalty at the rate of 200%, it is the burden on the assessing officer, and he has to cover the case under any of these 6 clauses. Now, sir, kindly see that even if it is simply underreported income or it is underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, the only impact of qualifying any particular addition or disallowance as underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income is that the penalty percent increases. The penalty goes from 50% to 200%. However, in any case, the addition or disallowance would be called underreported income. This again in consequence with the objective of the legislation to do away with the 2 charges, to make sure that there is only one term, that is underreported income. But to what extent they have been successful is a question which we will discuss a little later. Now, I earlier explained that until and unless there is the underreported income, which is computed as difference between the income processed and the income assessed. So in case there is no difference between the 2, even if there is some addition or disallowance, however, there is no difference between the assessed and the processed income. There can be certain situations which we'll discuss. Then, since there is no underreported income, no penalty can be levied. Even if it is a assessing officer tries to make out a case of misreporting of income. In any case, to levy penalty under 270 capital A, the existence of underreported income, that is difference between assessed and processed income, has to be there. Then only penalty under 270 capital A can be levied. Now, what are these scenarios under which the assessing officer can make a case of underreported income in consequence of misreporting? So, clause A, I'll come to it a little later. Clause B, failure to record investment in the books of accounts. Now, sir, any addition made on account of failure on part of the assessee to record investment in the books of accounts, in my humble submission, would be an addition under section 69 and other those 69, 69D up to 69D. So the question that comes to my mind is that since the addition is to be made under section 69 and other sections, with respect to which the taxation has been prescribed under section 115 BBE, for which in Taxation Law Amendment Act 2016, the tax rate was increased from 30 to effectively 78%, including surcharge and penalty. Since the addition is made under the section made under section 68, 69, etc., is to be taxed under 115 BBE, and you may kindly recall, along in the Taxation Law Amendment Act 2016, a new penalty provision under section 271 AAC was also introduced, which was specifically applicable in respect of the amounts assessed under section 115 BBE. So since there is a specific penalty provision under section 271 AAC, in respect of the additions and amounts assessed under section 68 to 69D, then what is the purpose of clause B? In my humble submission, since this provision of 270 capital A was brought by Finance Act 2016, and subsequently in December 16, 271 AAC was brought, this seems to be more of an omission on the part of the legislature, with most respect. And to my understanding, clause B, since in any case the addition would fall under section 69, and it would be taxed under 115 BB, which would be visited with penalty, if any, under section 271 AAC only. So clause B has no relevance to my mind. Now clause C, claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. Say if an assessee claims any expenditure on account of any purchases, and on being asked upon by the assessing officer to substantiate the expenditure, the assessee has not given any evidence to substantiate the same. He has failed to substantiate the expenditure. In that case, the assessing officer will seek to bring the case as underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income, and would levy penalty at the rate of 200%. Now, sir, kindly note that, say for example, in case of capital gains, the assessee has claimed cost of improvement. Say assessing officer examines it and finds that assessee has not been able to substantiate the cost of improvement. He disallows it. So the effect is that capital gain will increase. Now, in case assessee has some unutilized amount of deduction available under section 54, and which is claimed, and accordingly there is no taxable income, even though cost of improvement has been disallowed. In such case, the processed income, the return in processed income, as well as the assessed income would be same. There would be no difference, and since there is no difference, there is no underreported income. And accordingly, even if assessees fail to substantiate, even if it is the case of underreported income, it may be covered under clause C. But since there is no underreported income, there is no case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Now, recording of any false entry in the books of accounts. If assessee has reported any false entry, then obviously the assessing officer finds and is able to substantiate on the basis of material on record, then very well penalty can be levied at the rate of 200%. Sir, false entry these days, as soon as we read it, the first provision that comes to our mind is 271 AAD, which sir will discuss a little later. But the only point I want to submit here is that 270 capital A, subsection 9, this clause D, the penalty which is sought to be levied in respect of any false entry is in respect of the income element which has been underreported by the SSE, and accordingly, penalty on that account, on that default of the SSE, is being levied under Section 270 capital A. Subclause E, failure to record any receipt in the books of accounts having a bearing on total income. Now, sir, this is the only clause that has been qualified with the requirement of having a bearing on total income. So, as I discussed, unless and until there is underreported income, that is, there is some difference between the processed and the assessed income, that would be possible only if there is a bearing on total income. So, unless and until there is a difference, then only underreported income would arise, and then only penalty under 270 capital can be levied. So, however, probably in an overcautious approach, since the word receipt has been used, they thought it more to make it more certain to qualify this as having bearing on total income. But in my humble submission, in any case, in all the clauses, unless the addition or disallowance has a bearing on to the total income, penalty under 270 capital A cannot be levied. Now, sir, clause F. In clause F, if the assessee has completely failed to report the international transaction, then in such case, the penalty in respect of any adjustment made by the transfer pricing officer, the addition made by the assessing officer, would be at the rate of 200% on account of underreported income in consequence of misreporting. Now, sir, there can be scenarios that where assessee has failed to report the transaction. However, when the assessing officer comes to know of the transaction, he refers the matter to the transfer pricing officer. And on examination, the assessing officer, the TPO, finds that the transaction is at arm's length price. So if no adjustment has been made, then no addition has been made. And in case, even if assessee has failed to report the transaction, since no adjustment has been made, since no underreported income will arise, there is no case of penalty under Section 270 capital. Obviously, penalty under Section 271 AA for not reporting the transaction may arise. That is there. But no penalty under 270 capital A would come into play. Sir, clause A, misrepresentation or suppression of facts. Sir, when I read this clause, misrepresentation, the first thing that comes to mind is somewhat similar to the concept of furnishing of inaccurate particulars. And suppression of facts, similar to concealment of particulars. So, to derive the meaning, help can be sought from the erstwhile charges of furnishing of inaccurate, that is misrepresentation, and suppression of fact, somewhat similar to concealment. Now, sir, there can be situations again that where despite there is misrepresentation, which is writ large, there is no case of underreported income. And the example that comes to my mind, say in case of deemed dividend, a closely held company having accumulated profit advances some amount to the shareholder having more than 10% of the voting rights. Then the provisions of 222 subclause E are applicable. However, to avoid this situation, the assessee company camouflages this transaction as a transaction of commercial expediency. Assessing officer during the course of proceeding examines and finds that this facade created by the assessee is bogus and this amount advanced to the shareholder is a case of deemed dividend. However, kindly note, sir, deemed dividend as held by Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Madhuram Housing, the addition is the deemed dividend is to be taxed in the hands of the registered shareholder. So the addition, the amount will be taxed in the hand of the registered shareholder and not in the hands of the assessee company. So despite this misrepresentation by the assessee company, since there is no underreported income, there is no case of penalty under Section 270A, subsection 9. Now, sir, we have discussed who has the jurisdiction, what is the underreported income, what is the defense mechanism available, and how, in what circumstances, it can be any particular addition or disallowance can be covered as a case of underreported income in consequence of misreporting of income to levy penalty at the rate of 200%. Now, certain 2-3 interesting scenarios I want to highlight. First, sir, you may kindly recall, I specifically mentioned, and I would like to stress this again, that underreported income as defined under subsection 2 and 3 has been defined as difference between income assessed and income processed. under 143(1)(a). So you may kindly note that adjustments made under section 143(1) on account of, say, apparent error claimed by incorrect claim made by the assessee, or loss claimed when the return is filed beyond due date, and other adjustment which are envisaged under section 143(1). If any adjustment is made to the returned income, however, the penalty under 270(a) has not been provided for such adjustment under section 143(1). Say, for example, assessee has filed return at the amount of, say, rupees 10 lakh rupees, and on account of adjustment, say on account of employees' contribution to ESIPF, which has been a latest fiasco since the amount has been deposited a little late, then the process return says amount, the return is processed at 13 lakh rupees, and the assessing officer makes assessment at 18 lakh rupees. In such case, the underreported income as computed under section 270(a) would be 18 lakh minus 13 lakh, that is 5 lakh rupees. And this adjustment under 143(1) will not be visited with penalty under section 270(a). So to my mind, to exclude the adjustments under 143(1) from the rigors of penalty provision under section 270(a), the rationale that comes to my mind is that if something is, some adjustment is being made on the basis of the information furnished by the assessee, that is so apparent from the information furnished by the assessee in the return, then the assessee never had the intention to hide it. And accordingly, there is no requirement to levy penalty on such adjustments. But sir, in my humble submission, a contradictory view is available that any addition, any adjustment, say on account of loss being claimed, which is apparently not allowable, then such apparent incorrect errors, I don't find any reason not to levy penalty under section 270(a). But legislature in their wisdom thought it fit to exclude penalty on the adjustments made under section 143(1). The other situation which I want to discuss is in respect of returns filed by the assessee who for the first time file return after search has taken place. Say an assessee who has never filed return, and after the search has been conducted, 153(a) notice is sent, and returns are filed in response to 153(a) notice. I'll not talk about the specified years, that is the search year and the year covered under 271(a)(b), rather the earlier 4 years. Sir, say for example, in the return filed in response to 153(a) notice, assessee shows income of 50 lakh rupees, and the assessing officer assesses the income at, say, 80 lakh rupees, the assessment order. In such case, the underreported income is 80 lakh minus 50 lakh. The income shown in the return under section 153(a) for the first time filed by the assessee has not been covered for levy of penalty under section 270(a). Whereas, had it been a case of 148, in such case, yes, income assessed would be income, underreported income would be the income assessed, that is 80 lakh rupees. It has been specifically envisaged under subsection 2 and 3 that in case the return is not filed by the assessee or is filed for the first time under section 148, then the underreported income is income assessed minus basic exemption limit, obviously. So in the example that I gave, say in case of a company, there is no basic exemption limit. In case the income is assessed at 80 lakh rupees and return is filed for the first time under 148 at 50 lakh rupees, in such cases also underreported income would be 80 lakh rupees. However, in case of 153(a), it would be only 80 minus 50. So that 50 lakh rupees shown in the return under 153(a) has been, in my humble submission, omitted to be covered under the computation of underreported income, and which seems to be a clear case of omission. There is no rationale behind it, and in times to come, which it would be, to my mind, covered under the provisions for levy of penalty. So the next important aspect which I would like to discuss is, and I will give an example. So say current year income of the assessee is, say, 50 lakh rupees. Assessee has brought forward losses of, say, 60 lakh rupees. While filing the return, current year income 50 lakh rupees, set off to the extent of brought forward losses 50 lakh, and returned income nil, and say processed also is nil. Now assessing officer makes addition of 8 lakh rupees, and when he computes, it is 58 lakh rupees brought forward losses, and again up to 58 lakh rupees set off, and accordingly assessed income is also nil. So in this case also, despite addition of 8 lakh rupees, since the amount is covered by the brought forward losses, then since there is no difference between the process and the assessed income, there is no case of underreported income, and accordingly the penalty under 270 capital A can be levied. Similarly, sir, in fact, in respect of the current year losses, if assessing officer reduces the current year losses, then the difference between the loss claimed and the loss assessed would be your underreported income that has been provided in the computation of underreported income. However, in respect of the brought forward losses, once they are set off, there is no difference between the assessed and processed. There is no case of underreported income. There is no case of levy of penalty under section 270 capital A. Now, quickly, I'll just take you through the provision of 270 AA. 270 AA is a provision that has been introduced for the first time, which provides immunity in respect of penalty under section 270 capital A, and in respect of the initiation of prosecution under section 276 or 276 CC. So the provision is that if an assessee makes an application to the assessing officer, which is to be made within 1 month of receiving the assessment order in the prescribed form, that is form 68 as per rule 129, and if the assessing officer is satisfied that the assessee has paid taxes and interest as per the notice of demand within the period specified in the notice of demand. Second, the assessee has not filed appeal against the assessment order, and the time limit for filing the appeal has expired, then he may grant immunity under section 270 AA. But sir, kindly note, immunity is not available where penalty is initiated in case of underreporting of income as a consequence of misreporting of income. There is no immunity in such additions or disallowances. And the assessing officer will pass a speaking order accepting or rejecting the application within a period of 1 month from the end of the month in which application is received. So once an application is accepted by the assessing officer, then no appeal would be admissible under section 246A, or no application for revision 264 would be entertained. So sir, this is the concept of immunity which has been brought under section 270 capital AA. So with this, I complete my deliberation on 270 capital and 270 AA, that is the new regime of penalty under section for underreporting and misreporting of income. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for the patient hearing. Over to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Somil,
Thank you, Sunil.
for as usual a very nice presentation on the penalty under section 270 capital A. In fact, our Income Tax Act is full of penalties. You name it and then you will get it at the drop of the hat. And every year now the list keeps on becoming lengthier. This Finance Act 2020 was not an exception. In this penalty, section 271 AAD is the latest addition into the family of penalties under chapter 21 of the Income Tax Act. Now this penalty, as the R.S. Goyal Sahab has pointed out, or for that matter even Charanjot Singh Nanda Sahab has pointed out, is penalty for false entry. This is the caption of this penalty. But the background of this penalty, which has come out very nicely in the memorandum to the finance bill, was that with advent of the goods and services tax, there are lots of cases which have come to the notice of the government where false input tax credit has been claimed fraudulently. The racketeers have surfaced who merely issue the bills. They are not in the business. GST is neither paid nor is ever intended to be paid, and thereby such kind of attempts on the part of the taxpayers or the tax evaders, now it bleeds the economy. And therefore the memorandum says that such kind of pernicious practice deserves to be dealt with an iron hand, and that is how penalty of the magnitude and of the severity in the form of section 271 AAD has been enacted. Now, this penalty has been made effective from 1/4/2020, and therefore it has generated some amount of controversy as to whether this penalty would be applicable for any offense committed on or after 1st April 2020, and thereby, if I may be permitted to say loosely, would be effective from assessment year 2021 and 22, or 1/4/2020 would mean whether for assessment year 2021 and onwards. So first of all, we have to understand as a measure of concept that this is penalty provision. It is not retroactive, it is not retrospective, and therefore the date that it has to come into effect from 1/4/2020 would mean that it will be applicable in respect of the default or the offense envisaged under this section committed on or after this date. So any default of the nature which has been mentioned in this section, if committed prior to 1/4/2020, will not be visited with penalty under section 271 AAD. So this is clear, first of all, from the concept point of view, and from several other clauses in the finance bill, or now the provisions in the Finance Act, wherever the legislature wanted to refer assessment year 2021-22, it has specifically said so. Where legislature wanted to say that this will be effective from assessment year 2020 and 21, that the legislature has said so. But in respect of the third categories of the provisions, the legislature has left it at that stage that it will come into effect from 1st April 2020 without specifying as to from which year or from which assessment year it will be effective. So this penalty falls into this third category of the provisions, and therefore even from that logic and point of view also, this penalty will be applicable in respect of the default committed on or after this date. So this is the first thing which I just wanted to share. The second thing, now this section starts with a non-obstante clause. Not non-obstante clause, but then without prejudice clause. It says that without prejudice to any provisions of this act. So without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. Now what is the meaning of it? Obviously the meaning of it is that section 271 AAD, penalty is imposable, can be imposed irrespective of any other consequence which may follow or which may flow from any other provisions of this act. So if on account of these fabricated, false or fake invoices, if the penalty has come to be imposed under section 270 capital A subsection 9, which Saumil has just pointed out, under subsection 9, there is a clause E of section 270 capital A, which also says that in respect of the false entry entered in the books of account, penalty under section 270A subsection 9 is imposable, equal to 200% of the tax payable. So penalty under section 271 AAD can be imposed irrespective whether the penalty for this very kind of default has been imposed or is imposable under section 270A subsection 9. Now the meaning of this phrase without prejudice to any other provisions of this act means that even if some addition was made on account of such fake false invoices under section 68 69, 69A, etc. And because of that, the tax rate with which that addition has been fastened may be as high as 78% under section 115 BBE. Yet, penalty under section 271 AAD can be imposed. That is what the import and meaning of this phrase, without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. Now, nobody should be heard and nobody can be heard saying and contending, sir, I have already been penalized under section 270A. I have already paid tax equal to 78% of tax. Therefore, I should not be burdened with this penalty. No, that argument is not available. That is why legislature has used the expression that this penalty is without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. Similarly, if an SSE has been prosecuted because of the falsity of the evidence, then also insofar as this penalty is concerned, it stands on its own legs independently. So this is the meaning, because what happens in the matter of penalties, we often tend to argue, sir, there is a rule of double jeopardy. The rule of double jeopardy is that a person should not be punished twice for one and the same default. But then this rule of double jeopardy, which is enshrined under Article 20, Subarticle 2 of the Constitution, is in respect of the criminal jurisprudence. But then we tend to argue that the penalties are also quasi-criminal in character. And therefore, it has got the tinge of criminal jurisprudence, and therefore Article 20, Subarticle 2 of the Constitution should be pressed. And because of the operation of rule of double jeopardy, I should not be punished under section 271 AAD. This kind of an argument, because we chartered accountants or we lawyers or we consuls always tend to argue it. But then, with utmost respect, I would say, though I am conscious that there are certain judicial decisions given at least at the stage of the tribunal, where in the matter of penalty under 221 and 271 capital C, in Titagarh Steels, the tribunal has taken this view by applying the principle of double jeopardy. But then, with utmost respect, I would say that the principle of double jeopardy is not applicable in case of the civil proceedings. Penalty may be called quasi-criminal in nature, but essentially, Supreme Court has said in Dharmendra Textile that nonetheless, it is essentially emanating out of the civil proceedings. Therefore, the import, therefore, the meaning, therefore, the effect of the phrase used by the legislature that this penalty under section 271 AAD is without prejudice to any other provisions of this act is this, that this penalty will be imposed, can be imposed, is imposable on stand-alone basis, irrespective of any other consequence. The next issue which comes is that it says that if during any proceeding under this act, I am taking one phrase one by one because I and Somil had written one article on this penalty also, and I think this was our first article together on the onset of the COVID-19 perforced holidays. So we picked up each phrase, we did our research in whatever little measure we could do, and then we have written that article. And then I would request Somil to kindly circulate that article to Shri Goyal Sahab, and the Goyal Sahab now will circulate that article to all participants. Anyway, so it says when, if during any proceeding under this act, then later on if it is found, so what is the meaning of any proceeding under this act? Any proceeding under this act now does not have any restriction. Because the rule of literal construction now suggests that you have to see the provision and then you have to interpret it. So any proceeding, that proceeding may be the assessment proceeding, that proceeding may be the TDS proceeding, that proceeding may be the proceeding under section 201, that proceeding may even be an appellate proceeding. So any authority seized with any proceeding now finds something of the nature which I will discuss a little while later. So any proceeding, the scope of any proceeding cannot be allowed to mean only the assessment proceeding, because these kind of defaults may be found much prior the onset of the assessment. These may be found during the course of assessment. These may be found in a situation where the assessment has not been taken up, but some other proceedings have been taken up. Therefore, there is no warrant whatsoever to confine the scope of any proceeding to mean only the assessment proceeding. So this is first thing which I just wanted to make. But then it says any proceedings under this act. But if the authority before whom the proceeding was on, if he stumbles upon this kind of information which suggests the commission of the default, then if that authority himself is not the assessing officer, then that authority will have to send the entire material to that assessing officer to take appropriate action under the law. But then if he himself is the assessing officer, then obviously he is entitled to initiate the action under this section. Yes. So the next thing, any proceeding under this act now would mean the proceeding should be under the Income Tax Act. We cannot read the proceeding to mean under any other provisions of any other enactment. But then there can well be the possibility that any other authority under any other enactment, while seized with some proceeding under that act, now stumbles upon the commission of the default of this nature as referred under section 271 AAD of the Income Tax Act, then that authority now cannot be shut out, cannot be debarred in making reference along with the material collected by him to the assessing officer under the Income Tax Act. And based upon that material, the assessing officer under the Income Tax Act then may like to conduct his own investigations independently and then can corroborate the findings of the other authority under other enactment and then can take appropriate action by initiating penalty under section 271 AAD. But the finding that the default has been committed under this section and therefore the penalty needs to be initiated under section 271 AAD, that has to be during any proceeding under the Income Tax Act. Now it is a matter of common knowledge that various authorities under the various enactments, at least under the central enactments, and there is a protocol also to this effect that the authorities under the different enactments will share the result of their findings to the other departments under the different enactments so that a holistic view and if any action is warranted under those respective enactments can be taken. So any proceeding under this act, the proceeding should be under this act, but then the proceeding may be of different nature and it cannot be confined to mean only one type of proceeding, because many times I have seen my professional friends confessing that this proceeding has to be the assessment proceeding. But then by taking this kind of an argument, now do you want to shut out a situation where the assessment has not been made? Now can you say that if assessment of an SSC has not been made under section 143(3), now this proceeding, despite the evidence having come into possession of the income tax authority, now cannot be initiated? Now that kind of an interpretation, unfortunately, taken by some of us may not stand to the test of law before any court when it will be tested on the touchstone of the provisions of the Act. The next, again related to this, is during any proceeding under this Act, whether would mean any proceeding of this SSE or it can be proceeding of any other SSE. And whether the proceeding has to be the proceeding of this year in which the default has been committed, or that proceeding may be the proceeding of any year. So these are the questions, because this section 271 AAD has been a section of immense significance with severe consequence, may not be very lengthy section, but each word and phrase which has been used in this section now admits several interpretations, and therefore what can be and what should be and what ought to be the correct interpretation. Now that is a question on which we are deliberating upon. Otherwise, simply I could have told as to what is the provision. Even there was no need for me to tell as to what is the provisions, because I know, I am conscious that I am speaking before the professionals who are very seasoned professionals. They know much more about the provisions of law. Therefore, I thought it that based on our research as done by me and Somil, now I should dissect this section. So now what is the meaning of any proceeding, whether any proceeding of SSE or any other SSE? Obviously, this proceeding can be the proceeding of an SSE. There cannot be any dispute. So if the proceeding of an SSE is on, assessing officer comes to know that this SSE has entered or has made a false entry in his books of account. Then the assessing officer, during the course of that proceeding, now is competent to initiate action against this person. He is competent to initiate action in respect of the other person also, who has caused this person to enter the fake or false entry in the books of account. So any proceeding of the SSE or even any other SSE can give rise birth to the proceedings under section 271 AAD. Now if an assessing officer of, say, Mr. Y now was seized with the proceeding of Mr. Y, now he comes across during his proceedings that Mr. Y has issued fake and false invoices to several persons. Now therefore, the genesis of this proceeding in the hands of X, who has taken that false invoice, may emanate from the proceeding of Mr. Y. And why should this not be allowed? And therefore, why should not the meaning of this expression, any proceeding, to mean proceeding either of the SSE or of any other SSE? So this proceeding to mean the proceeding of the SSE or proceeding of any other SSE. Similarly, whether proceeding of this year in which the default has been committed or the proceeding of any other year. Now again, to restrict that this proceeding during the course of which the action can be initiated should be the proceeding of the year in which the default has been committed. Now that may or may not be possible. In fact, such kind of defaults are prone to be detected only after the year is over. Therefore, there is no warrant whatsoever, there is no justification whatsoever to again give a restrictive meaning that proceeding should be the proceeding of this year in which the default has been committed. Therefore, the reasonable interpretation is that the proceeding may be the proceeding of any other year. But the only one limitations which we have found and which reasonably can be interpreted in this manner in which I am going to interpret is that the different year in which the action is to be initiated in respect of the default committed for a different year should not be placed at an unreasonably distance. Though there is no time limit for initiation of the action of the penalty under section 271 AAD. There is no time limit given. Once it has been initiated, then there is a time limit for passing the order. But there is no time limit given for initiating the penalty under section 271 AAD. So it can be initiated in any year, of course, when it will be discovered. But then the year of discovery should not be that far whereby the SSE may be compelled to take this argument that this penalty has been initiated at a very unduly delayed time period, and therefore this penalty initiated with such an exceptionally delayed period is liable to be cancelled on this ground. Because the year of default and the year of initiation, it should be within the reasonable time. The courts have said that even if there is no limitation for initiation has been prescribed, but then the initiation has to be within the reasonable period of time. Now, what can be the reasonable period of time? There is no fixed yardstick which has been prescribed or which can be prescribed. It depends upon the facts and circumstances of each case. And therefore, that general principle of limitation, that the action should not be unduly delayed. Now, that will govern the interpretation of this phrase, that the proceeding of which year, or proceeding can be initiated in which year. So that is what my submission is. Now, without prejudice to any other provisions, is that if during any proceeding under this act, it is found that the books of accounts maintained by any person. So next prerequisite for invocation of section 271 AAD, that there has to be the books of accounts maintained, because the default has to be found with reference to the books of accounts maintained. So if books of accounts are not maintained, though are required to be maintained under the law and yet not maintained, then obviously the penalty can be imposed for non-maintenance of books of account. But penalty under section 271 AAD, for which the maintenance of books of account is a sine qua non, is a prerequisite, now having not been achieved, therefore penalty under this section would incapable be, it would not be possible to impose penalty under section 271 AAD. There may be another situation where the books of accounts are not required to be maintained, like in case of those SSEs who opt for presumptive scheme of assessment, like under section 44 AD. He doesn't maintain books of account, he is not required to maintain books of account, and therefore there is a serious issue of applicability of section 271 AAD in such a situation. But then even this SSE who is opting to be assessed under section 44 AD on presumptive basis, now may be required to substantiate that the total turnover now is within the threshold limit of 2 crores of rupees, and therefore he may be required to substantiate, and for that he may be required to have some evidence. Suppose this person was into the business of issuing the fake invoices, and therefore he was trying to be assessed under section 44 AD at 8% by showing that his turnover is less than 2 crores of rupees. Here are the copies of the bills which he has issued, which according to the tax department are the fake and fabricated invoices. So in such a situation, now whether the penalty under section 271 AAD can be imposed, of course it will be resisted by this SSE on the ground. Sir, he doesn't maintain books of account, and books of accounts have been defined, though inclusively, under section 2, clause 12, capital A. And therefore, even the maintenance of the details of the bills issued by him cannot be construed the books of accounts within the meaning assigned to it under section 2, clause 12A. And therefore, he may try to wriggle out from the rigor of the penalty under section 271 AAD. There may well be another situation that though he was maintaining books of account, but his books of accounts have been rejected under section 145. And obviously, when a person was found to have entered into such kind of transactions, how can his books of accounts be relied upon? So if an assessing officer resorted to the rejection of books of accounts under section 145, and thereby now this SSE wants to take a plea that since his books of accounts have been rejected, therefore it should be taken as if books of accounts were not there. No, that kind of an argument may not be available with him. Or there may well be a situation the books of accounts have been maintained, the assessment was made, books were not rejected. Later on, it was found about the existence of the fake or false invoices. Then also that SSE cannot be heard saying, sir, in the first round, my books of accounts have been accepted. Even if it may have been accepted, that action may be a wrong action, which can call for rectifications or revision or reassessment in whatever manner. But merely because the books of accounts have come to be accepted at some point of time, that doesn't mean that on finding of the fake or false invoices having found place in those very books of accounts, the penalty should not be levied. The penalty is liable to be levied because here he was maintaining books of account and these false and fake invoices are used. There may be another situation where though the books of accounts were being maintained, but these bills, fake invoices, false invoices, now they were not entered in the books of account. And then the SSE takes a plea, sir, these fake or false bills, though you say according to me they are not, but then even if they are fake or false bill or invoices, but since they are not entered in the books of account, because in survey, these bills were found. Let us take an example. The survey took place. These bills were found. Even before they could be entered in the books of account, they were found. Now, can it be said that the books of accounts were maintained? These fake invoices were used because the another ingredient of this penalty that there has to be false entry, and false entry has been defined, and it has been defined under the explanation. And how has it been defined? Now it has been defined, false entry includes use or intention to use. So books of accounts are there, false invoices were found, they may not have been used in the books of accounts so far, but the facts and circumstances are unequivocally speaking in this manner that yes, they have to be or they were intended to be used. Then also the penalty under section 271 AAD now can be imposed. So without prejudice to any other provisions of this act, if during any proceeding under this act it is found that in the books of accounts maintained by any person, there is, now what is? There is false entry, semicolon, or next clause, and an omission of any entry which is relevant for the computation of total income of such person, comma, to evade tax. So two substantive defaults have been envisaged under section 271 AAD. आज मेरे मुंह में कुछ छाले हैं, इस वजह से थोड़ा मुझे दिक्कत हो रही है बोलने में. So there are two substantive defaults which have been envisaged under section 271 EED. The first substantive default is false entry simpliciter. There is no qualification, pre-qualification or post-qualification. And the second is an omission of any entry, and there is a qualification which is relevant for the computation of the total income of such person to evade tax liability. This is the post-qualification. So since there is a semicolon between the two clauses, there is the use of the word or. Therefore, insofar as the first substantive default is concerned, it is the false entry simplicity. It may not be relevant for the purpose of computation of the total income of such person. It may not be in order to evade any tax liability. The moment it is false entry, and false entry which is defined under the explanation to section 271 EED, that will complete the full circle of the default. The second is the false entry. Now it has been defined. False entry includes use or intention to use what? A, B, C. There are three clauses under this explanation. Now A, B, C. A says forged or falsified documents such as false invoice. So the legislature, first of all, has tried to use a very omnibus expression. False or forged or falsified documents such as false invoice. So by using the expression such as, the legislature has sought to give a precise meaning to the earlier expressions forged or falsified documents. And thereafter again the legislature has opened the womb by using the expression in general a false piece of documentary evidence, and thereby such omnibus expressions used in clause A later on now again is seeking to open the Pandora's box, as if this expression seeks to cover any false piece of documentary evidence and is not restricted only to the false invoices alone. But there are other clauses also, clause B and clause C. Clause B speaks of the false invoices in respect of supply of goods or services where the supply of goods or services has not taken place. Clause C refers to the invoices issued to or issued from any persons who do not exist. So clause A, half portion, speaks of invoice. Clause B, full portion, speaks of invoice. Clause C, full piece, speaks of invoice. So explanation, which consists of A, B, C, substantially speaks of the invoice, false invoice. And therefore, in the light of such pre and post qualifications in the form of false fabricated invoice, now what is the meaning which has to be given to a false piece of documentary evidence? That is the question. Now we all are aware to the rule of adjusdem generis. We know the rules of interpretation, the golden rules of interpretation. Now there is a principle of interpretation, that adjusdem generis. Now the adjusdem generis means that the meaning of a word has to be given according to the meaning of the other words in whose company this word is. So a person, as is often known, by the company he keeps, therefore the rule of adjusdem generis says that the meaning of a word or phrase has to be given according to the meaning of other words and phrases in whose company this word or phrase is. So that principle has to be kept in mind. So if we go by that rule of adjustem generis, then the preceding words are forged or falsified documents such as false invoice. The rule of adjustem generis demands that the later portion of explanation A should be read in the light of the preceding expressions. That is what the rule of adjustem generis. Then there is another rule. The rule is nocitere socis. And as the adjustem generis says that the preceding words, the nocitere socis rule says the meaning of the subsequent words that will indicate the true meaning of the preceding word. So since A, B, C under explanation to section 271 AAD speaks of the false invoice, the fake invoice, the fabricated invoice, the first invoice. Therefore, based on these two principles of interpretation, the scope of section 271 AAD penalty in our respectful submissions, in my submissions and my dear Somil's submission, is this, that its operation is limited only in respect of the fake invoices, the false invoices, and is not intended to cover any other types of so-called accommodation entries transaction. Now we reinforce this interpretation with the help of the memorandum, because the memorandum appended to the Finance Bill 2020 speaks about the purport, speaks about the object with which penalty under section 271 AAD was introduced. Therefore, we have to see, we can see, though I am conscious about this principle that if the language of a provision is unambiguous, we need not to fall back on the memorandum. But as I demonstrated a little while ago, that everything cannot be said to be unambiguous, because we have fallen back on the rules of adjustem generis because of something. We have fallen back on the rules of nocitere socis because of some ambiguity. Therefore, in the face of such ambiguity, if we fall back on the memorandum in order to find out the purport and object, then there is nothing unusual, and we are not doing violence to the interpretation of a penalty provision. This penalty is very harsh provision. The magnitude of the penalty which can be levied, the number of times it can be levied is so severe that the interpretation of this penalty without looking at the purport and object of this penalty given under the memorandum is bound to lead to miscarriage of justice. That is what our humble and considered opinion, our means mine and Somil's, and we have done a reasonably, sir, we are not infallible, we may commit errors, but then we can tell you, we can share with you only what we understand and which we understood in our own little wisdom, the meaning. So false entry now has been defined, and that should, according to us, would mean with reference to the fake invoice, the false invoice, the first invoice, the fabricated invoice. Now the second substantive offense is an omission of any entry which is relevant for the computation. Even that omission of an entry, that also has to be seen in the light of the memorandum. Omission of an entry, which entry? Because the word entry is common in both the substantive defaults. In the first substantive default, false entry. In the second substantive default, the omission of an entry. Therefore, the substantive defaults under both the clauses will have to be interpreted having regard to its purport and object as enshrined in the memorandum. So if these conditions are there, without prejudice to any other consequence under this Income Tax Act, if during the course of any proceeding under this Act, if it is found in the books of account maintained that there is a false entry or an omission of any entry which is relevant for the purpose of computation of total income to evade tax liability, then the assessing officer may direct that such person shall pay by way of penalty a sum. Now kindly mind the sum equal to the aggregate amount of such false or omitted entry. Now you see the severity. But before I come to this phrase, the assessing officer may, then let me quickly take to subsection 2. Now, which also empowers the assessing officer to impose penalty on any other person who has caused the first mentioned person to either make a false entry or to make the omission of an entry, or he himself omits the entry. Then the second person is also liable to be visited with penalty. And the assessing officer of the first mentioned person is the assessing officer of this second mentioned person also. Now the second mentioned person may be assessed somewhere else. His assessing officer may be different. But the assessing officer of the first person now is the assessing officer for this second person also. So subsection 1 is applicable in case of a person who himself has made a false entry or has omitted an entry, whereas subsection 2 is applicable in case of an enabler, in case of a person who facilitated this, in case of a person who has caused the false entry or the omission entry to happen. So those racketeers, those middlemen, those commission agents, now they are the target of subsection 2. So when these conditions are there, then what the assessing officer can do? The assessing officer may. Now this word may gives an impression as if to penalize or not to penalize under this section, to impose or not to impose penalty under this section is as if based upon the choice and discretion of the assessing officer. He may choose to levy, he may choose not to levy. Whether that discretion which is there in the assessing officer to impose or not to impose penalty, whether it is an absolute discretion. Discretion is there because the legislature has used the expressions may. But then that discretion is not a discretion which can be exercised arbitrarily. The discretion which is envisaged is the judicial discretion. There are certain principles based upon which the discretion is to be exercised. It cannot be exercised at mere whim and fancy. There are certain established judicial principles based upon which a discretion has to be exercised. And those principles are justice, equity, and good conscience. So whenever an authority in whom the discretion is vested exercises the discretion or fails to exercise the discretion, and when his action or inaction is called in question before the higher court, the higher court sees now whether this was exercised or not exercised having regard to the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. So what is the meaning of it? The meaning of it is that if the conditions for exercising the discretion in a particular manner, that is for the imposition of penalty, do exist, then this assessing officer, even if the discretion is there, is a duty bound to exercise the discretion in favor of the imposition of penalty. That is what the meaning of discretion. And obviously, under section 274 subsection 1, no penalty can be imposed without issue of a penalty notice to the SSE or without giving adequate opportunity of being heard to the SSE. So obviously, in response to this notice, when there will be the defense which will come from that person on whom the penalty is to be imposed, this penalty imposing authority, that is the assessing officer, is a duty bound to take into account the impact and import of the reply and defense advanced and conveyed by that person, and then will take a judicious call on those very principles of justice, equity, and good conscience, whether the penalty should be imposed or should not be imposed. And that is why the legislature has used the expressions may. One should not misconstrue, one should not misunderstand merely by the user of the expressions may by the legislature as if this discretion is absolute, autocratic, arbitrary. No, it is not like this. So the assessing officer may direct that such person shall pay a penalty equal to the aggregate amount of such false entries or the omitted entries. Now, the first mentioned person, he is also liable. The second mentioned person, he is also liable, equal to the same amount. So, if a person has issued fake invoices, say to 100 persons, so all 101 persons, first person or 100 persons and this person, 101 persons, all can be imposed penalty equal to the amount individually, aggregate of the false entries and the omitted entry. Now you can very well imagine the severity. So if the fake invoices were to the tune of rupees whatever at somebody's end, so to that extent the amount, so this person who was the enabler, who was the facilitator, who was the commission agent, and if he has issued bills, fake bills to 100 persons, the aggregate of all 100 bills now would be the quantum of penalty which can be imposed on the second person. Whereas all those 100 persons who have entered the false entry based upon such fake or false invoice now will be liable to visit penalty in respect of the amount of false entry which each one of them has entered in their books of account. Now, there are two more principles on which I would like to discuss. The burden of proof. Now, burden of proof, this is penalty provision. Therefore, the burden of proof is resting on the shoulders of the assessing officer. He will have to come out with evidence. Sir, here is the proceeding. Here are the books of account. Here is the use or intention to use. Here are the fake or false invoices. Here is the false entry. Or here is the entry which was omitted to be entered. And here is the person who has done it. All these ingredients which make up a default under 271 AAD on a person now will have to be proved by the assessing officer. This will be for him to lead evidence. So this principle is not diluted. Nobody should remain under any kind of confusion that, sir, sometimes additions are made under section 68 or 69 because of the fake or false invoices, and therefore there is a deeming fiction. No, there may be a deeming fiction for the purpose of making addition. But when it comes to the levy of penalty, that too under section 271 AAD, the burden is on the alleger, one who alleges the default. The burden is on the shoulders of the assessing officer. He will have to discharge that burden. He will have to lead the burden. He will have to lead the evidence in order to discharge that burden. Only then the burden will shift on the shoulders of the SSE. Now there is one more important principle of law which I want to discuss. is about a reasonable cause. Now, there is a defense mechanism provided under the Act in section 273 capital B. And that defense mechanism is applicable to most of the penalties. The penalties which do not find place in 273 capital B is penalty under section 221, penalty under section 270 capital A. Earlier penalty 271(1)(c) was also not there. Penalty under section 271(AA)(c) is not there. And penalty under section 271(AA)(d) is also not there. That reasonable cause is a defense applicable in respect of those prescribed penalties that if an assessee comes forward and satisfies the assessing officer that there was a reasonable cause for the commission of the default, then the penalty may not be imposed. That is what the law is. But the legislature, in its own wisdom, now made it a point to see that this kind of defense is not available for this kind of default under section 271(AA). And I ask a question to myself, what can be the defense? What can be the defense which can be there for a person, available with a person, to say though he issued the false invoices, but then there was a reasonable cause for it. Now, the kind of default envisaged under section 271(AA)(d) is there cannot be any cause whatsoever. You forget about the reasonable cause. So when there cannot be any cause, let alone the reasonable cause, therefore the legislature in its wisdom thought not to provide this penalty under the defense mechanism umbrella of section 273B. And in the end, I would say, why I'm saying in the end, because there is one back-to-back lecture of mine organized and held by Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Therefore, I have to log in there. Therefore, in the end, I would say, and I will take up the questions, that this penalty, all said and done, we are not for or we are not against it. Those who commit default, they need to be penalized. There is no quarrel with this. But then the magnitude and the severity of this penalty is quite harsh. Therefore, it will have to be ensured by those who are responsible for the administration of law that this penalty may not be prone to be misused or abused by those who would be responsible for imposing this penalty. And it should not become any tool for any ulterior purpose and motive. That has to be ensured. So with this, I will end my today's deliberations on section 271(AA)(d). So these two sections, 271(AA)(d) is of a very recent origin. Section 270 capital A, which is in substitution of the old 271(1)(c), may not be of that recent origin, but then it is somewhat of recent origin. Somil has picked up and has spoken on 270A. I have spoken 271(AA)(d). If there are questions in the chat box or otherwise, then I would be pleased to answer. Well, sir, there is no question. Very surprising. Now that goes to show that both of us have made our point so explicit and clear. Therefore, we did not leave any scope for any. Now, Mahendra Doshi ji is saying, can you share PPT? No, I do not know. I mean, Mahendra Doshi ji, probably you may have heard me for the first time. I don't use any PPT. I speak extempore. Even if you could not make out that I have spoken extempore, except referring the act at some places, then I would feel sorry for me, if not for you. I would feel sorry for me. I speak, the God speaks, I do not speak. Goddess Saraswati speaks. I am her sadhak. Yes. So there are no questions, Goel sir. Please unmute yourself, Goel sir. Shakun, there are no questions.
Yes, sir. I'm lying. I'm waiting for Goel sir to speak something. Yeah, there is no question, sir.
There are no questions, so we can. Okay, now one question has come.
It is, sir. Thank you, sir.
No, one question has come. I have seen just, please hold on, in chat box. Ramesh Ahuja sir ka aaya hai. Can it be stated that action under section 133 are proceeding? Of course. Proceeding doesn't mean assessment proceeding. Proceeding may be the investigation proceeding. Proceeding, I mean, is a word of very wider amplitude. Now, if in survey, these invoices are found, and yet if somebody can be allowed to say it is not proceeding, oh, that will be a travesty of justice, Ramesh ji. That will be a travesty of justice. Any question? No question.
Any question from members? Kindly type or put it in the question and answer section.
अरे इसका शकुन
जी सर.
इसका भैया रिकॉर्डिंग हमें दे देना, हमारे प्रेमी बड़े हैं वो मांगते हैं.
जी सर, पक्का दे देंगे आपको.
उसे यूट्यूब पे भी होस्ट कर देना और हमको भेज देना लिंक के साथ. है
परफेक्ट सर. सर आपने इतनी मेहनत करी है, आपके छाले होते हुए भी यू हैव डिवोटेड सो मच टाइम टुडे. मतलब इट्स सो नाइस ऑफ यू सर. मतलब इट्स रियली इनक्रेडिबल ऑन यू.
अभी मुझे अभी 1.5 घंटे और बोलना है अभी आईसीआई में.
हाँ नहीं, ये जो आपका टेम्पो था, ये टेम्पो डिस्टर्ब नहीं हुआ. बीइंग आपके छाले भी मुंह में होते हुए टेम्पो डिस्टर्ब नहीं हुआ आपका बिल्कुल भी. सर थैंक यू वेरी मच. सोमिल सर आल्सो. सोमिल जी
अरे कोई आया, रमेश आहूजा जी का फिर आया है कुछ.
हाँ, इनका आया है. कैन इट बी स्टेटेड दैट एक्शन इन द,
ये तो हो गया था. सपोज इंटरेस्ट हैज नॉट बीन चार्ज्ड फ्रॉम समवन, कैन इट बी लेबल्ड एज ओमिटेड एंट्री? नो. Interest or no interest now is something which is on account of contractual arrangement between two contracting parties. Now that may give a lead for the assessing officers to investigate further, but then that is not conclusive to say that it is an. Sanjay Thampi sir क्या कह रहे हैं?
Can you provide some input on penalty under section 271 FAA?
What is that section penalty 271 FAA? संजय जी रुकिए जरा प्लीज. 271 FAA penalty for failure to furnish statement of financial transactions or reportable account. FAA when furnishing a statement of financial transactions reportable account. Now what do I remember under section 285A or 286? The statement of financial transactions of reportable accounts has to be furnished. Now, if there are inaccurate particulars which are furnished in that statement, like if you remember under section 271(1)(c), there used to be two charges: concealment of particulars of income or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. So 271 FA is for failure to furnish. That is equivalent to that concealment. I am drawing a parity. And 271 FAA is for though you have furnished the particulars but they were inaccurate, then there is a penalty. So I do not want, I do not know whether you want any specific question, then I can answer. But if there is, you furnish some statement which you are obliged to file, and if you furnish some inaccurate particulars in that, and there is a penalty which has been prescribed under the statute. Yes. Let us finish it, Goel sir. Sakun ji.
Goel sir, please.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji.
हाँ जी. Pardon?
Thanks a lot.
अरे sir, so nice. I am honored, sir. I am honored.
नहीं, हमारा एक
both are honored.
हमारा एक सौभाग्य है कि जब भी हमने आपको बुलाया, आपने हमारे को बिल्कुल टाइम दिया.
नहीं, it is always my pleasure, sir.
Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shakun. Thank you.
All of you members.
Thank you.
Shakun. All the way. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Good day, sir. Good day to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.